The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We released a report last year saying we have 12 years left to get to net zero emissions, or in another few decades, it's going to be game over, because if you know, when you crawl into a sleeping bag, it doesn't get warm right away. It takes a little time. The IPCC is essentially a conservative body, so their estimates tend to err on the side of more optimism, perhaps, than other groups. If you wanted to get involved in direct action, like what Ken Ward was talking about, or if you wanted to support other people who were involved in direct action, Extinction Rebellion is a fantastic organization. They started in the UK. They have successfully, through their nonviolent civil disobedience, caused a number of groups to, or a number of governments, including the UK national government, one or two other national governments, and hundreds of local and municipal governments around the world to, they have several demands. The first is declare a climate emergency. We need to stop using the word climate change or global warming and start saying climate emergency or climate crisis. And I'm not really a representative of the group, so I'm just going to say that straight up. I'm just a big fan. And there are other demands. You can go to their website. It's rebellion.earth. There's a local chapter, XRPDX. And one of their other demands is also to get to net zero within 5 years, not 12, 5, because they believe that is the timeline that we're looking at. If you listen to researchers who were not officially representing the IPCC. Also to start the People's Congress, the Climate Congress, for us to get together and have regular decision-making power about what solutions we need to address this. And I think there was one more there that I can't remember what it is, but so, that's my recommendation. As far as this neighborhood goes, I think it would be great if we could schedule an unconference, sort of open forum, and I can talk to anyone who's interested about what unconferences look like. You can also look up open space technology, but essentially they're participant-led conferences where you have, at a venue like this, you have a list of locations, like different rooms down one side, and across the top you have different time slots. And people writing a sticky note what they want each group to talk about. Anyway, so there's a lot of tools for organizing, because I think ideas are great, but we need to be organized in how we, and so my suggestion immediately for the conversation is to be about how do we organize to actually create the change that we all carry with us, because each of us has a shard here to bring to the table. Collecting all those shards and weaving them together is essential. Thanks so much.
I also was reminded in our discussion in the other room that soil is a big part of what we need to rehabilitate. And Earl Blumenauer is behind that as well. He's very supportive of helping encourage the topsoil rejuvenation of our lands, because so much of our topsoil has gone into the rivers because of plowing, and they're finding out that plowing is not necessarily the best way to plant things. And the reason it's so important is the topsoil is the sponge. It is the absorbent space that we have on our earth that keeps things alive. And the better that our topsoil is, the more the water is retained. And we are getting more and more cloud bursts. The water is coming down in sheets and running off. Without a way to capture that water, we have lots of longer dry spells. So the better our earth is and our properties, the better our plants will do, the cooler we will be. So I think that is one area that we all can work on. And to that, there is a item in the newsletter called Groundwater 101. That is taking place January 25th.
I tried to go, it was overbooked, I tried to get in and they already filled up.
Yeah. Well, it is with our Columbia, who's putting it on?
It was Portsmouth Water Bureau people that were gonna talk there, but it was put on by the Columbia something.
Columbia Slough. Okay. Well, we'll have something more up to date next time. But I know that the Soil and Water District often puts on these type of workshops. And check our website and also look up the Columbia Watershed. Columbia Slough. Okay. Soil and Water District. Next, we have Michael Tempero, who has just cycled in through the rain to join us. And Michael is an amazing man. He's the head of our environmental committee at the state, and has been working diligently to try to help put a limit on the diesel emissions that we are experiencing along the freeways in our high freight corridor areas. So, Michael.
I'm also really happy to say this is my last meeting of the day. Our session starts next Monday, and any semblance I had to owning my own schedule will be gone in a few days. And this session, it's in the even numbered year, and so it's a short session. It only lasts for 5 weeks maximum. And it's very intense. The good news is it's short. The other good news is it's not long. And I recite that mantra to myself every day. When we created these short sessions, they were really for 4 purposes. One, to rebalance our budgets. Things have come up where our budget needs adjustments, and that always happens. We are having to rebalance our Department of Human Services budget and our Health Authority budgets to the tune of about $400 million. Fortunately, and this is rare, but we ended last session with a surplus and an ending fund balance that was almost $1 billion. We are hoping to save most of that. We have been gradually every year putting more money into our reserves because, as you know, the economy has been doing really well since the recession. We've been in the plus category for more than a decade now, actually. But we know that a downturn is coming, and we want to be prepared for it. My very first session, which was in 2009, I had the good fortune of getting elected right as the recession hit. And we had to cut $4 billion from our budget. And that was awful. It was awful. So anyway, we want to be prudent, but we also obviously recognize that there are priorities. And so the first purpose of the short session is to rebalance our budgets. The second is to deal with any emergency things that have come up since the last session that we really can't wait another year to deal with. I think you'll see some added funding for homelessness and mental health services, because, you know, I don't need to tell you we're in a crisis there. So that we'll be spending a lot of time on that, on those issues as well. You know, the third thing that we do is, you know, the even-numbered years election year. And here in Oregon, there's a tendency for people to want to put things on the ballot, issues on the ballot. And the short session can be a way to look at what might be headed to the ballot and seeing, is there a way maybe we could craft a legislative solution to it? Because as I think you know, ballot measures can be great, but they are very blunt instruments to deal with what are often complex issues. And you have complex issues, and the proponents and opponents turn them into just bumper stickers or, you know, slogans. And it's really better if you can craft a piece of legislation and deal with it that way. The fourth reason for the short session is to deal with issues that were dealt with in the long session, the previous long session, but didn't quite make it. For whatever reason, there was some kind of hiccup or some questions arose at the end, and you know, rather than have to wait 2 years to go back to that issue, if it's an issue that has really had a lot of airing, that's very appropriate for this short session. To come up with a completely new piece of legislation, a new policy area in a short session is hard because the time periods are very compressed. We have to get bills out of their committee within the first 2 weeks. That's as opposed to in the long session, the first 2.5 months you have. So it's very intense in that way. The bill that is really preoccupying me, and I think I can safely say is going to preoccupy the legislature this session, is our climate action bill. And that does fall into the last category, I would say. As many of you know, this is an issue that we dealt with in the last session. Actually, we dealt with it in the last couple of sessions. We've had hundreds of hours of public testimony and thousands of pages of written testimony. We came about as close as you could get last session to passing a piece of climate legislation. It passed in the House and was poised to pass in the Senate, and then Republican colleagues left the state in order to block that vote. And let me back up. You know, this is an issue, as I said, that we've been dealing with for quite a while. I would say this latest real push came in 2017, when early in 2017, in January, we heard from our Oregon Climate Change Research Institute. I don't know if you knew we had one, but the legislature created it a dozen years ago. It's based at Oregon State University, although it has scientists from all over the state associated with it. Their job is not to do original research in climate, but rather to collect the best research that's out there, where there seems to be consensus, you know, around this issue, and then advise the legislature on it. These are all individual scientists who are, let me tell you, they agree on very little, actually. They each have their specialty and their take on different aspects of climate science, but they do have to come together on this one issue to give us advice every 2 years. And so they came before my committee in 2017 and said, and just to back up, you know, Oregon has set very aggressive climate reduction goals. It set them back in 2007. It reflected the best science at the time. And the scientists from Climate Change Research Institute came to us and said, hey, remember those goals that you set back in 2007? Well, science is showing that those are not adequate, actually, that the effects of global warming and climate change are happening more quickly than we had anticipated even then in 2007. you're going to have to set more ambitious goals. So, okay. And then the next week, we heard from the Oregon Global Warming Commission, which is another body that the legislature created to really look at the effects of global warming here in Oregon and the impacts on our snowpack, on our rivers, on, as you heard, the effects of extreme weather events and how they're washing down hillsides and blowing out culverts and damaging roads. So the Global Warming Commission gives us that, those, and they also track how we're doing on our meeting our climate reduction, our emissions reduction goals. And so they came in the week after the Climate Change Research Institute. They said, hey, those goals that you set 10 years ago that you just heard need to be made more aggressive? Well, you're not even on track to meet those. And then a week later, our new administration was inaugurated. And we knew that we had to really get serious about this. Change is not going to happen anytime soon at the national level. And so what we have to do is each state has to take action. Ideally, band together, join together in a regional approach. And that's what we're going to need if we're going to make a difference, especially as you know, the federal government pulled us out of the international commitments that were made. And as soon as we pulled out, China suddenly, they were on track to do some really good things, and they changed their tune. Canada did the same. So, but it was important that we work on the grassroots. So that's what led to our comprehensive climate change legislation, which sets a cap of our emissions. That when the program begins, then each year gradually we have to have fewer and fewer emissions in the state. And if you are a fuel importer, or if you're a manufacturer and you are not meeting your share of the goal, then you have to purchase a permit to allow you to exceed that goal. And then that becomes of value to other entities that can actually reduce more easily. And it's a way, it's a proven sort of market-based way of getting emissions down. It's what we use. Many of you will remember the problem we had with acid rain back in the 80s and 90s. And this was we used a very similar kind of market-based system, and it was very, very successful. Anyway, a number of countries are using this methodology. California has been using it for the last 5 or 6 years. New England states have been using it in their power sector. It's been working pretty well. And so that's what we were advised to use this approach, and that's what that legislation would have done. It failed. And it largely failed, I think, for reasons that really the facts did not substantiate. There was a lot of concern among rural Oregonians that this would hurt them inordinately. Although, actually, the bill is designed to help rural Oregon. Because rural Oregon, is where there's a lot of potential to develop renewable energy industries. Oregon has we don't have fossil fuel. We don't create fossil fuel, but we have, large swaths of land that are just perfect for solar arrays and wind turbines. Sherman County along the Columbia River, many of you I'm sure have seen those turbines there. What you may not know is that that part of the gorge never experienced the economic downturn that the rest of the state did because of the revenues that came from those wind turbines. Their school districts stopped taking state money in that period because of the revenues that were coming in. And plus, each resident gets like $1,000 a year in some kind of bonus, kind of credit. Kind of remarkable. And that is something that really could be extended to other parts of rural Oregon. But, I probably don't need to tell you that climate change is a very politicized issue. It didn't used to be that way. Some of you I know are old enough to remember when George Dukakis ran against George Bush, the elder. You may not remember that George Bush ran on a platform of climate action. I don't know if you remember that. No. He did. He was proposing a cap and trade program, similar to what we're proposing now. Dukakis, though, he was the anti-climate change candidate. And that it was the politics, because at that time, Democrats represented coal country. And anything that might compromise, that industry, or the heavy metals in the Midwest, very, very much dependent on fossil fuels. And so politically, it was kind of natural that it split out that way. But it was very tragic because things have completely flipped now. And so, the reason that some of my Republican colleagues in the Senate left the state last year really had nothing to do with their own beliefs about climate change. It just had to do with political pressure that they were feeling from home. So anyway, as when the session came to an end, we decided, we've got to try this again, of course, but let's modify the bill to really make it crystal clear that this will not hurt rural Oregon, that it will help rural Oregon, in fact. And so we've made a number of compromises, a number of changes, and I can safely say, and I will say, you'll hear us saying that, this is a bill that is good for all of Oregon. But I can't say for sure that we'll have a session. I think we will have, we'll have a session at least for the first 2 weeks. And then this bill will come to the floor. There's actually more support for it among the Democrats this time, especially with the compromises that we've made. And it will come to the floor, and then Republicans may lead. So it's really, we'll see. It'll be exciting. The journalists love it. They would much rather focus on that than on actually what's in the bill. It's kind of exciting, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to get through it okay. You may wonder why we have this problem. Oregon is very unique among the states, where to do business on the floor, we have to have 2/3 of the members in attendance. Normally, and I'm sure you belong to organizations, a quorum is usually a majority, 50% plus 1. And it is good to have quorums, because you don't want a minority to be making important decisions. You do want to have a majority. But when that majority, and that's what all but 3 other states have, is a simple majority. But when the requirement is 2/3, then that means that a super minority actually can block things. And that's kind of what we're facing at this point. Yes?
Can you change that?
We can change it, but it will require a constitutional amendment. It's locked into our Constitution. The reason it's in our Constitution actually goes back to when the state was founded. Oregon was one of 3 states, or 4 states, I think, that followed the Indiana model for their Constitution. They basically stole the Indiana Constitution. Everywhere it said Indiana, they put it in Oregon. And that's what other states did as well. Most states followed, I forget, maybe the Kentucky model or something. And that's, most other states, that's why they have a simple majority. But the Indiana model had a 2/3. One of the states that had it did change their constitution. They did an amendment. And so now they're just Oregon and 3 other states that did it. You know, you would think it would be a no-brainer because this is very potentially destructive of our system. You know, if people can just not show up and stop things. It's actually, Oregon is the worst of all the states that have this because we also have a limit on the number of days that our session can last. Most other states don't. We do. And so what that means is, you know, what happened last year was those who left knew that they could just run out the clock. It used to be, before we had annual sessions, you could do this kind of thing. You could deny a quorum, and Democrats did it back in the early 2000s. But it was just kind of a symbolic gesture, right? You would do it to make a point. You knew, I mean, you had to come back sometime. But when we went to annual sessions in 2010, we limited the number of days the session could last. And so, in effect, you could threaten to run out the clock then. And that's what made it really tough. So we're kind of wrestling with this. It's clear that if the Republicans walk out again, and by the way, they walked out twice last year, but they did come back the first time. That if that happens again, I think we're going to have to do something. You know, the polling is not good on a constitutional amendment. One of the things Oregon has kind of woken up to, maybe we don't want to change our constitution every year. There was a time, many people remember, back in the 80s and 90s, where every election we vote to change the Constitution, you know, to put the kicker in the Constitution, or ballot measure 5 in the Constitution, or, you know, just all of these things that many of us have come to regret since then. So it's true, you don't want to change the Constitution lightly, but this may well call for it.
I would vote for it.
Okay, let's do it.
I think many people are upset about the stalemate and the fact that we need to act on climate change, and this is insane.
Yeah. So my hope is that we will pass it. I will say that states all over the country are looking to Oregon to do this. You know, as I mentioned, California has a very comprehensive climate action program. They're a partner right now. They're not partnered with any other states. They are partnered with Quebec in Canada. If we go down this road and partner with them, Washington will follow us. And British Columbia already has a carbon pricing program that is, you know, part of a very comprehensive climate action strategy. If we can do that, you know, British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, California, you're talking about the world's 5th largest economy, if you put those together. You know, sometimes people say, why do this? I mean, little Oregon. But, you know, if you can sort of band together, you can really have a lot of impact and make a difference. So, even though it's giving me a lot of sleepless nights, and I'm not saying that metaphorically, I'm saying it literally, it's worth it. We have to do it. I wasn't here when the young woman from Grant talked about the urgency of this issue for young people. I wish I'd been here and see it. I can imagine what she said. The Capitol was inundated last year with young people. And I have to say it was marvelous, actually, to see them step up and really take this issue seriously, as they should, because they're the ones who are really going to be affected by it. Yeah.
Can you talk about the dismissal of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and the student lawsuit, climate lawsuit that was recently dismissed, and they threw it back to you?
No, well.
You said it was legislative action that had to happen.
You know, they're probably to be honest. But that decision will be appealed, I think. You know, it was a narrow subset of the court that did that ruling, and I think it's being appealed to the full Ninth Circuit. We'll see what happens. I do agree that actually this requires a legislative solution. You know, as I mentioned, the politics are hard, but that's what we were elected to do. This is something that, you know, if you're going to do it right, and you want to make sure that you do it in a way that is getting emissions down, but that is not driving people, manufacturers out of the state, which is an issue, actually, for global warming. That's not a local issue. It doesn't help us if a company moves to Idaho and emits, you know, sends gases into the atmosphere from Idaho. Better to figure out a way to sort of ease them into the program and keep them here. And you know, that's one of our big goals. But it's hard to do that with a ballot measure. It's hard to do that with a court decision. Really, I think that's what legislation is for. Be happy to answer any questions, you know, about the program or about any other. I mean, since I'm here, I'm part of Senate leadership, so I know everything. just don't blame me for anything.
What's been done to the carbon reduction bill to make it more appealing to rural Oregonians?
Yeah.
And what makes you think that their Republican senators will sign off on it?
Right. One of the main objections to the bill and to the program is the price that it would put on gasoline. Right. I mean, if you are going to, you know, put a price on carbon in order to, you know, send a price signal so that people will be more tempted to drive more fuel-efficient vehicles, and to, you know, to take some of that revenue and invest it in planting more trees or more sustainable agricultural processes, you know, practices like we've heard about. Or a good example of the kind of investment we need is in weatherization, more weatherization of people's homes in order to reduce their bills and reduce their emissions. It's kind of a win-win. Anyway, you can't not put a price on gasoline, right? Yeah, transportation fuels are the biggest source of our emissions here in Oregon. 40% of all our emissions are from transportation. Actually, the manufacturers are only responsible for 3 or 4% of emissions in the state. We're not a heavy manufacturing state, and where we are actually, it's, believe it or not, it's fairly clean. And of course, our power is relative to other states. We're blessed by having a lot of hydropower, and we're starting to make some real inroads in renewables. So we're in a good place as far as that goes. But the big challenge is transportation. You know, there was a lot of concern about the impacts of higher fuel costs on rural drivers because, you know, A, they have to drive longer distances generally, you know, B, they don't have transit, or, you know, it's hard to do car share, you know, carpooling, and things like that. Their options are more limited. One of the things that we did, and we're continuing to do, is provide rebates to all low to moderate income drivers, right? So that if your household income, if you're a family of 4, is $65,000 or below, you will get any of the extra that you would have paid because of this program. You'll get it back on an annual. I can't say that you won't get a check. It'll be a tax credit on your taxes each year. And so no matter, well, it's based on county. So each county, depending on what the average miles driven in your county is. So those living in the rural counties would be getting a bigger tax credit than those, where people don't have to drive so much. Anyway, we're really concerned about the impacts, but we've taken it a step further this year, and we are actually, we're phasing in these increases geographically. We're starting in the Portland metro area, and then in 2025, bringing in most of the counties that are west of the Cascades. And then at some time in the future, we'll bring in Oregon that's east of the Cascades, which, is most of Oregon, geographically. But it's, in terms of our emissions, it's only 15% of all of our gasoline and diesel is in those areas. Those are the areas that largely are represented by our Republican colleagues, those who walked out. And it just seems, their argument for why they walked out was they needed to protect their constituents. And I respect that. I think they were wrong. I think the bill was already taking care of their constituents. But now it's really going to be hard, I think, for them to do that. So that's one example of one of the changes.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, at one of your Saturday gatherings, I brought up using the river for an electric ferry system.
Yeah.
You said, well, that's interesting, but you didn't make out your seat. Subsequent to that, in a very short time, I learned of Susan Blackholm and the Flock Ferry Initiative, and it's really well organized, and they've done studies, and they have a lot of people, professional people who are working on this endeavor. Are you a little more interested in, that's interesting these days? It seems that the pathway's there, the river's there, you don't have to go any road, you don't have to move anything in the motor center. And they have electric powered ferries, passenger only now, that navigate at over 30 knots. Seems like there's a lot of green jobs there, a lot of green stuff. Can you speak to your current perspective on that, as the chair of the environmental?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly, I'm still intrigued, and I was, you're right, after you brought it up, you were really, I think you were the first person to suggest that to me. I mean, and then it was just soon after that we heard about plans to maybe do that. I don't know what's come of that, and it's an intriguing idea.
Well,
obviously,
go to flogferry.com. It's a very elaborate website that organization has, and it's got a very lot of information there, and how they're trying to get funding, and who they've got. They've got a lot of professionals, engineers, etc., who are studying this and trying to make it happen. So, flogferry.com. That'll give us that information.
Thanks for reminding me of that. I mean, obviously, if it's a way to get people off the roads, to really appeal to commuters, that could really have value. Because, I drive I-5 when we're in session, it's really good for me because I never have problems with traffic, even though, I live in the Northeast. And that's because, I leave so early in the morning to go to Salem, and I come back so late at night. What traffic problem? But unfortunately, when we're not in session, I have to go down there at sort of normal hours, and then it's awful. And I think there's obviously a lot of debate about the Rose Quarter project. I think there are questions about how much time that project will really save. Actually, I'm not sure the value of it really is in its ability to reduce congestion. Its benefits may be around safety more than, I think the projections are that it will save people about 1 to 2 minutes in their commute home. I think it may help, but I think we really have to come up with more serious ways of getting commuters off the road. And however we do that, with transit or carpooling, or tolling, whatever, so that the people who are on those freeways are those who are traveling interstate and who really need to be there.
I have a question about diesel, and the issue that I've come to find out is that the majority of the diesel emissions east of the Cascades is from transportation and off-road vehicles, and 70% of the diesel emissions west of the Cascades is from off-road vehicles, meaning construction development. What can we do to mitigate that or change that? Because, our philosophy has been, business as usual, so.
Thanks for raising that. And it is true, I think most people, when they think of diesel emissions, they think of trucks. And they think immediately of long-haul trucks, right? Actually, long-haul trucks here in Oregon are probably 80% of them are clean in their diesel. That is, they have engines that were built after 2007, 2008, in that time period, where changes were made at the federal level so that any engines built after that point need to be about 90% particulate free. It's the particulates that are the real problem with diesel. And just because of that business model of long-haul trucking, almost all the trucks on the road now are post-2007 and clean. The challenge is more those that operate in-state. And there you have a lot of older trucks. And here in the Portland area, it's a problem because we have the two interstates, we have surface roads, we have a geography that traps diesel emissions. But, even more important, we have a lot of construction going on. And that in combination makes the Portland area airshed one of the worst in the country. Multnomah County, the air quality here in Multnomah County is one of the worst in the country. Think about that, right? So I will say on a positive note, we did finally last session pass legislation that will require on-road vehicles to be, the older ones to be phased out over the next decade. We have a source of money to help with the replacement of those. We have a requirement that all of the road construction that happens in the metro area, starting now, needs to be done with clean equipment. That's positive. But we've not yet really tackled the off-road construction equipment, other than in that area, in that part of it. And that's because we actually don't really have a clear idea of what's out there. There's not a requirement right now to register your off-road equipment. You have to register your truck, right? You have to register a car, so we know exactly how many trucks are out there, what their age is, how many miles they travel. That's all known. We don't know it for the off-road. And so what we did do in 2017 was authorize and fund an inventory of off-road equipment in the state. And that's just finishing up now. And once we see that, then we'll have to figure out how to deal with that. But,
what are some examples of off-road vehicles?
Certainly you won't find that much of it here, but farm equipment, just construction equipment, cranes, everything, earth-moving kinds of vehicles, yeah, all of those. And those are very heavy emitters. There's a woman, professor at Portland State University, Linda George, she's an atmospheric scientist, and she did a study. It was very fortuitous because Portland State was doing a lot of construction. And so she just had her students kind of track the air quality just right there at Portland State. And it was, I forget what, but an incredible multiple of what you want to have happen in terms of the level of particulates. So it is a big problem. Yeah.
You're also on the Judiciary Committee.
I am.
So what are you doing for climate justice?
Well, so what do you mean exactly? Because the Judiciary Committee doesn't necessarily deal with this.
Well,
What do you
public
think?
safety? You're on public safety. So if we're in a climate crisis, I'm just curious, what are you trying to do to hold people accountable and to limit their actions on a justice level for our health and safety at being in a high, being in the area we are here in Multnomah County and our high risk at these levels of our air quality.
Right. Yeah, that's actually not the job of judiciary. That is the job of environment and natural resources. And what's important is that when we do these bills, we give agencies like DEQ the authority to levy substantial fines. That has been a challenge for us in the past, but over the last few years, I think we've made a lot of progress. We created a program called Cleaner Air Oregon. A lot of it was actually stimulated by the glass manufacturer disaster, Bullseye. Yeah.
We hold your microphone.
Sure, sorry, yeah. And it led to just a really comprehensive program that DEQ is now going in and is, has identified the most serious polluters and is levying fairly substantial fines. And we're hoping it will make a difference. It is really important that they have that authority.
Actually, with regards to the glass issue and with DEQ,
The glass issue was an accidental issue. That was found by experimentation that was being done with moss, and then the minerals were found to be in that. But with DEQ, another thing that is sort of interesting to me is that if people live outside of the Portland city limits, their cars don't have to pass DEQ emissions, and they're actually driving further distances.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know how that works.
Yeah.
And within Portland, yeah, from outside inside.
Right, yeah. That program was really set up. It doesn't really have anything to do with greenhouse gas emissions. It has to do with local pollution. Benzene and other pollutants that are in gasoline. And it's really part of a federal EPA program which requires that kind of action in areas where you have concentrated levels of pollution. So outside of Portland, certainly there is pollution, but it doesn't have that kind of concentration that requires a vehicle emissions testing program. So that's why we have it. Washington State has done away, I think, with their emissions testing. So I think there is a certain amount of leeway, and we are at the state feeling pressure to remove Metro's authority to do vehicle emissions testing. I don't agree with that, but we are getting a lot of pressure to do that. Yeah.
Why?
Why?
From who?
Well, people who just don't want to go through the bother of having to take their car in to be tested. That's a lot of it. You know, the garages love it, right? Because
Can you get the check engine light to go off on my car? I really appreciate it.
yeah, actually, that is a good question. We actually had legislation to allow people to go in. Right now, it's considered proprietary, and unless you are a registered whatever mechanic, you have to pay for the ability to go in and turn your light on. We may be bringing that bill back. Yeah.
So we've been talking about a lot of big things. I want to actually talk about a very personal, local thing about climate change, like how we can all personally do some things, like consumerism, like buying different things in the grocery stores, like fruits and vegetables, and then we lost our ability to recycle a lot of things, clamshells and blah, 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 over the years. So it's more of like a personal call for the people in the room to know like how we buy things, but also like what are we doing locally, regionally about how we do our produce and our consumer goods, about all the packaging and all that stuff I know.
Right. No, that's a really good question. And there is a lot individuals can do, but I think at some level, there is a role for government to help sort of force these things. You know, using a principle that's often called product stewardship, right? That is, those who are making the goods and, you know, have a responsibility for how those goods are disposed, right? We have a bill this session that some people are chuckling over, but it's actually, I think, a really good bill, and it's a product stewardship program for mattresses. We're having a real challenge with mattresses that are taking up space in our landfills. And mattresses can be recycled. They can be taken apart. You know, St. Vincent de Paul and other recyclers have really the capacity to do a lot and provide a lot of employment for people who could use that work. But what we need to do is have a program where it's really easy for people to get their mattresses, you know, back to the people that sold them to them, and then they will deal with them. And so that's, you know, it would probably mean a $10 fee that was added to when you buy the mattress, and then the producer of the mattress would be taking on, you know, $10 or $20 expense on their side. And it would be a good way, really, to get these things out of our landfills. We are looking at doing something similar with household hazardous waste. We did something with drugs, a drug take-back program. You know, we need to really start thinking about the total life cycle of the products that we buy. And, you know, right now, plastics are cheaper than alternatives because we're not really paying for the full price of them, which should include, you know, the difficulty of disposing of them. But it's a really important issue. Any other?
Well,
Yeah.
mattresses is one thing.
Yeah.
That's great. I don't think we don't do that other than like 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
You know, once in a while.
Yeah.
But on a daily and a weekly basis, we consume a lot of plastics. Because it's a better price, oftentimes, to buy things in consumable products in some of our local grocery stores, which is fine. However,
we no longer have the ability to recycle those things that we used to. And so, again, I'm, asking for people in the audience to do that proactively and encourage that in their own circles. But my question for you is, like, how can we get back to, like, obviously some of us promote farmers markets and like kind of going back to the days where we didn't, these boxes to buy tomatoes in or boxes to buy lettuce in and like very simple things, because then that's all going to landfill. So what can we do with those local things that each of us can do? Because you've been talking about some very big things, but there's a lot of things that we can individually do differently as consumers to help this crisis.
Yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
what can we do?
I guess the question though is, what exactly is the role of government here, especially state government? We can't really prohibit, I don't think we could prohibit plastic packaging, from coming into the state. We do have, as I think our bottle deposit program, which did extend to include plastic water bottles and a number of other things. We increased the deposit to 10 cents, which has had a huge impact, believe it or not. We're now up to about 90% plus of all the containers are being redeemed, which is very good. And we need more of that, frankly. We're starting to see very slowly use of reusable beer bottles. I don't know if any of you have, Boy Beer, which is a great beer, local beer. They use reusable containers.
But they have to be transported to Montana to be washed.
Yes.
So don't buy Boy Beer, and that's what I do.
Yeah, I think that actually now they are able to do it here locally. Initially, it was kind of counterintuitive, but to get the bottles washed, they had to send them to Montana and then send them back. But I think now there's a place that's doing it locally. That's what I'm told.
Actually, just briefly with all of this, one thing that I think is really useful for everyone is to start using Nextdoor for a way for all of our social media to start sharing suggestions about what each person individually does and to promote individually assisting
others with the process. I rarely go to the grocery store without asking neighbors if I can get something for them. It builds community. It's one person driving and picking up something that somebody else would be going out for. So to just think in that direction, if everybody did, not that I'm saying, if everybody just tried to think in this way and used social media like Nextdoor for something that was pretty important.
There's a lot we can do, absolutely. And I do think that there's a role in government to encourage that kind of thing and to raise awareness and to help create networks to make that possible. But it is a huge problem, frankly.
To this lady's end, I thought about packaging my entire life, and when I was in Students for the Environment in the 70s, I packaged up all my Nancy's yogurt containers and put them in a box and sent them back to Eugene. And I got a nice little letter, and they said, thank you very much, but we're not switching from plastic. And shortly thereafter, they had a warehouse fire and burned up. I can imagine how many tons of plastic in their warehouse. So I've been an advocate of packaging. My poor husband, we've been recycling for 40 plus years in Vermont and in Oregon. But could we not charge Oregon State University and the hemp industry to come up with better packaging? Boy Beer does not have to use those plastic caps on their 6-packs. They could use a nice hemp twine grown here in Oregon, developed that. Bags could be made out of hemp. Oregon State University is our land trust college. They are pioneers throughout the world. Hemp industry is growing. And I really think that we could build a great business in better packaging. And then we as the consumer has to make a decision. Are we gonna buy that heavy plastic bag, or we're gonna buy a nice hemp bag that could be reused? Or, there's all sorts of ways that it could be done and create new industry for it.
Absolutely. I'm a big supporter of hemp production. Although I will say I've been disappointed because virtually all the hemp that's being grown in Oregon now is being used for CBDs, and they're not really taking advantage of its textile properties, which it should. I mean, it's a great potential. The uses are many for hemp. Are we about there? Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for coming out. And let me say that those suggestions, they sound like neighborhood association meetings, right? People think about neighborhoods, about community, and kind of taking responsibility for one another. And thank you very much for coming out.
We are at the end, and the next 3 minutes are what do we do next? And I'm open to suggestions. Yes, Ed?
Yeah, I'd like to encourage everybody to go to the website frogfairy.com and take a look. It's a very impressive organization. Frogfairy.com. And if you feel there's value there, let Senator Dembro know as a constituent, because when we talk about transportation, etc., it's a very clean, very inexpensive compared to a lot of the ones we're talking about solution. Frogfairy.com. It's a well-developed organization that's having a hard time getting traction with our government officials.
Thank you, everyone, and good meeting. We have some leftovers that need to be cleaned up in the other room.